In this video, I'm going to go over what's new in IBM Copy Services Manager 6.2.11. 6.2.11 EGA'd on December 18th of 2020. For this video, I'm going to concentrate really on what's new for 6.2.11, but just a quick overview here, slide that shows you exactly what IBM Copy Services Manager is. If you want more details, I encourage you to watch some of our other YouTube videos out there on the CSM YouTube channel. But really, IBM Copy Services Manager is there to help simplify your replication needs across all IBM storage systems. Here's the overall list of features that we've added to the 6.2.11 release. You'll see a number of RFEs. Those are requests for enhancements. So that means those are the features that you, the user, have been asking for. So even though 2020 has been a crazy year for all of us, you'll see that we've been really busy developing and implementing the features that you've been asking for. Without further ado, let me drill down and talk about these in more detail. Right, the first feature I'm going to talk about is the display and return of the volume WWN in our CSM GUI and REST interfaces. So right now in the field, CSM will display the volume username, so that's a user-defined name or Voltaire of the volume, as well as a full name, so that's a unique name identifier that CSM creates for each of the volumes. However, neither of those are what most distributed systems or host systems see when you actually map the volume to that drive or that system. What they usually see is what's called or can be called volume WWN. It may have different names, but we determined that volume WWN was probably the closest to the name that will be consistent across the different platforms. And so without the volume WWN, customers would go into CSM, they'd see the username and the full name, but they wouldn't be able to really tie that to the volume that's mapped on their host system unless they did a little bit more work. And in particular, automation systems that may auto provision volume. So as a volume is needed, it goes and creates a new volume on the storage system on the fly and then maps that volume. Well, those new map volumes need to be added to replication to ensure they're disaster recovery capable. And without that volume WWN, it makes it a little bit difficult to determine which volume to actually add to the copy set or they can use in the given session. So we will now display and return volume WWN based off the different storage system types across the GUI. So you can see the example there in the volumes table. We will display that volume WWN in a column. That column will be hidden by default, so not everybody needs to see it. But if you go to the top right corner of the table header, there's a little icon there that allows you to hide or unhide columns. You can unhide that column and start viewing the WWN if you need to. I believe the copy set table also has that feature for the different roles within a session. And the WWN will also show when you hover over or view volume details throughout the GUI and various pop-ups. And then for the REST interfaces, you'll be able to see that in the volume_WWN tag. So when you query a copy set, etc., you'll see that volume tag that will display the WWN. And last, we added a new query so that if you have the volume WWN, say you have the host map to a volume, you have that WWN value, you can now use this REST query, that volume/volume WWN, provide that name, and CSM will return the volume information as related to the CSM server. So that's includes the username, the volume, the full name, etc. All the information we have. So hopefully that helps not only automation services, but perhaps customers as well that view the GUI to try to map it to a given host. A couple releases back, CSM exposed its REST API. We've had a REST API for a little while, but we finally externalized it, docked it, and it's available out there on Knowledge Center for you to look at and start using. Well, it looks like it's being used, and we've gotten a few requests based off its usage for some additional information or changes. The first one this slide covers is the sessions query. So the sessions query returns a list of all the session and the info for those sessions. The problem that the customer had was it's quite a lot of data. So it's not just the sessions, but it's possibly the progress on role pairs, etc. So they get this, if they have a lot of sessions, they get this large sum of data that they have to read through. Now, what they really ask for is they just want a short list. Give me the sessions that are out there. I don't want all the data. And so now we have a session/short query. So that will return a list of the sessions with very minimal detail. It'll contain the session name, type, state and status, and a couple other things. But really the idea is to give it a short list, short array of that detail so that customers can go through it a lot easier. The second one is for Spectrum Virtualize and Accelerate systems. When CSM manages Spectrum Virtualize or Accelerate, we create a consistency group on the hardware itself. So the CSM GUI does display this consistency group, the hardware consistency group name, so that if you go to the corresponding GUI for either of those storage systems, you can actually see and map that back to the CSM session. However, the REST API was missing that detail when you queried the session. So now, with the 6.2.11 release, we do just return that detail. So for Spectrum Virtualize, you'll see a HWCG tag in the session that information that's returned that holds the hardware consistency group name for the FlashCopy or remote copy session. And for Spectrum Accelerate, you'll see the CG tags for both the primary and remote site, as well as the pools used for the primary and remote site. So we store both of those on the and display both of those on the CSM GUI. So we're returning them now in the REST interface. This next feature covers Spectrum Virtualize FlashCopy relationships. So a couple releases back, we added a discover command to CSM FlashCopy for DS8000 sessions. And what that does is essentially discovers existing FlashCopy relationships on the DS8000. Well, for this request, they wanted the same kind of feature for Spectrum Virtualize. They had a scenario where they were basically trying to, flash onto some primary volumes, and they wanted to assimilate those. They were doing that through the SVC CLI through automation, and wanted to assimilate those relationships into a CSM session. And so they didn't, if they didn't have this discover feature, basically CSM would just delete and then reflash the relationships. And they didn't want that. They wanted to keep the relationships there because they were incremental and then didn't want that full copy to happen again. So we've added the discover command so that it's allowed for Spectrum Virtualize volumes in addition to the DS8000 volumes. But there's a few rules here and situations that apply for Spectrum Virtualize sessions. So let's go over them. So the discover command, it can be run from any of the define, prepared, or target available states. There is a preparing state for FlashCopy and Spectrum Virtualize. That's that issued after the start command. It prepares the volume before you actually issue the flash command, which does the flash. If it's in the preparing state, you can't do the discover because you've already started the flash process. You got to finish that one before you are allowed to discover anything out there. The second one is any discovered pairs we will mark as consistent, but we can't guarantee the consistency. So we don't really look at it. In terms of time-wise, we assimilate them and assume that you're using this feature just like we did with DS8000. We said same thing with DS8000, that you're using this feature knowing that the volumes are consistent across the session. Or if you know that they aren't consistent, you know that to handle it accordingly in terms of restoring, etc. Next thing to note is this is slightly different than we do with the remote copy. So with remote copy on assimilating existing relationships, which we allowed a day, the relationship cannot be in a consistency group. Well, FlashCopy is different. We decided that it has to be in a consistency group, and part of the reason we did that is that we wanted to ensure that as best we could that it was consistent to the other relationships that are in the session or in that consistency group. So if it's in a consistency group, we know and it's flashed, we know that it should be flashed together with the other volumes. So we will, if the volume is not in a consistence group, we will not allow it to be discovered or assimilated into the session. So a couple other things. So if a hardware relationship is found, but it's not part of the consistency group mapped to that session, you won't be discover or fail. We won't allow it. The pair will just stay defined with an error message. If you've already flashed the CSM session, so it has a consistency group, anything discovered on the hardware has to be part of that same consistency group. And the reverse of that is if you haven't flashed the session yet, so there is no consistency group tied to the session, the first volume, and you do the discover command, the first volume pair we find, it has to be in a consistency group. Well, we will take that consistency group and map it to the session. So any other pairs that you have in the session that are discovered as well, they have to be part of that same consistency group. So in other words, CSM is not going to be able to pull volume pairs from one consistency group and add them to another, etc. If you're doing the discover command, all the pairs you've added to the session need to be part of the same hardware consistency group. And then let's see, what else am I missing? So last there, is obviously if you've turned off incremental on the CSM FlashCopy session, even if you've set incremental on the hardware and that relationship that we discovered is incremental, the next flash, you better note, will not be incremental on CSM, so we'll withdraw the relationship and reflash. So make sure that if you are assimilating incremental relationships, that you have incremental set on the CSM session as well to make sure that the next flash picks it up correctly. All right, so this next feature, the slide, is not really a new feature, but it's a change. So in 6.2.10, we released a new migration session type. This is really a session type that it only supports global copy for DS8000. And so it doesn't have the disaster recovery capability. It's a straight vanilla global copy that allows you to essentially migrate from one volume to another volume or one storage system to another storage system of DS8000. And previously in 6.2.10, that was only available on a fully licensed version of CSM. Well, in 6.2.11, we are making that free of charge. So it's now part of the no charge license, which is enabled already on any CSM DS8000 HMC installation. So on all 8.1 and above DS8000s, CSM is pre-installed on the HMC, and so all those CSM instances can now use and manage the migration session type with CSM. You do not need to purchase another license. You don't need to do anything special. It's available. You should be able to use it out of the box. And then the one thing to note is if you do have issues or you need to open a support ticket, make sure you open that support ticket against DS8000. That will pipe it to the correct channels so that you get the right support you need. Because you don't have a CSM license, assuming you don't have a CSM. If you're enabled for CSM, then you can go ahead and open against CSM. But if you did not purchase a CSM license and you're just using the out-of-box solution, use it, open against DS8000 so that you make sure you have that support that you need for that solution. All right, for this next feature, it has to deal with the CSM backup files and the modifications we made there a couple of releases back in 6.2.9. So we enhanced the backup feature of the server so that it not only backs up the database, which has the connection info and session info, but also collects all your property file changes and other changes that you might need or might have made to the server itself. So what that does is allows you to use the CSM installer to migrate and use that new backup zip file to completely and totally restore or move a CSM server. So everything that you had changed and managed should be on that new server and you're up and running. Now, after we made that change, though, there was no way to really use it on ZOS installations. So you could take that zip file and then manually unzip it and move it through the contents to the correct directories. However, that's kind of a pain. And so for 6.2.11, we've updated the ZOS install process so that it can now handle that backup zip file. And we made it straightforward before. We already had a migrate from value in the IWN install script for ZOS when you install CSM. That previously was meant for TPCR to CSM installations or migrations. So you'd specify a folder, the TPCR folder, and it would pick those up and move those to the new CSM directory. But now you can now specify the .zip file from the backup. If you specify that in that migration from the CSM IWN install for ZOS, will pick up that zip, unzip it, change any file formats that it needs to, because there's if it's distributed, if it was created on a distributed file server, then it might have to change some of the formats on some of the files so that it works on ZOS, etc. It now will handle that zip file. You don't need to manually unzip anything. You can thus restore or move from one Z system to another Z system without a lot of work. So hopefully this helps some of you customers that are migrating on ZOS with the ability to use that backup zip file. So this next feature is really a continuation of the work we started in 6.2.10. So in 6.2.10, we added the ability to view RPO historical data for any global mirror DS8000 session. And now in the 6.2.11 release, we're adding the LSS OOS statistics as well. So we will, when you go in and click on View Modify Global Mirror Data for a session that has DS8000 Global Mirror, you'll get a pop-up on the left side. As you can see in the screenshot, there's both RPO graph and LSS graph. If you select LSS graph, you will now get the LSS OOS statistics graph there in the GUI. So why would you use this? So basically this is used, we've always kept LSS OOS statistics information, but you had to export to a CSV file. Now this displays it graphically, so you don't have to do that. You can see it straight from the GUI. But usually you'd use that when you see high RPO values. So if your session starts exhibiting high RPO at certain time frames, you can first look at the RPO graph, see for a given role pair, see when that time frame was when you had that high RPO, and then then you can go to the LSS OOS graph for that same time frame and see if there's one or more LSSs that might have a high amount of OOS as well. And when I say OOS, that's the out of sync tracks. So that's the amount of data that has to be copied over to the secondary. If you see a high number of those, it's possible that that is the reason why the RPO is high, because the DS8000 couldn't form the consistency group because it couldn't drain all that data in the allotted time frame to avoid any issues with your applications. And so with the LSS OOS, you can now pinpoint, maybe it's that LSS, maybe I had a batch cycle that ran at that time that drove a high amount of data. Maybe I need to adjust my bandwidth at that time. Maybe I do need to do something. So it just helps you drill down and diagnose high RPO a little bit easier with this LSS OOS statistics. And so you can select just some details about this. You can select which LSSs you want to see. So if you want to focus in on a certain number of LSSs, you can do that. You can adjust the time range with the slider at the bottom. And when you hover over, you'll see the specific LSS OOS, etc. So hopefully customers have been asking for these graphing capabilities for quite a while. We're building them in, and hopefully you'll find this quite useful. This next feature is related to the IP to ZOS host connections you can create in CSM. So you might have a CSM server running on either on ZOS or distributed, and you might want to manage multiple sysplexes or monoplexes using that single instance of CSM. So we allow that with the IP to Z connection. The request, though, was the fact that they have multiple sysplexes or monoplexes that actually had the same name. So say a name like local. So they actually had the same name. They had a reason for naming it that way. It's not easy to change. And so, but they still wanted a single CSM instance to manage it. And so the reason why we couldn't do that in the past is when you want to manage hyperswap or hardened freeze, etc., you had to associate the sysplex to that given session. The reason you did that is so that that session, when you issued the commands, knew which sysplex to go call based off the host connections to set up that hyperswap or hardened freeze solution. Because it's possible that you have multiple sysplexes tied to the same storage system, DS8000, etc. And so you didn't want we can't in CSM automatically determine which sysplex to call. We ask you to associate it. But if the sysplexes or monoplexes have the same name, that drop down was only showing that name, and so you couldn't distinguish which one you wanted to associate to it. And so for 6.2.11, we've enhanced that to allow for this case. And what we've basically done is concatenated the sysplex name to the host name. So when you make the connection, you'll provide that host name. We will then discover the system name, and we concatenate those so that in the dropdown of the session properties, when you're doing that association, you'll see the concatenation, and you'll be able to determine which one you want to actually associate to the session. So hopefully you can now helps manage that requirement. You can now manage from that same CSM server multiple sysplex even though they have the same name. This feature has to do with DS8000 FlashCopy across both the FlashCopy session and practice sessions. So there is an option to fail the flash if the target of the flash is online. By default, the CSM session will not fail the flash. However, there is a property file you can set in server properties that will specify for a session role pair to do the fail of the flash. But customers wanted to have that within the session properties itself. So that's what the RFE was based on. So now you'll see in the FlashCopy session and any practice sessions that have flash, a new option that says fail flash if target is online. This is for CKD only volumes, but if you check that, now any flash will fail if the target is online to that ZOS host. Just a couple things to know. There's the list of the sessions that support this feature, this new property. FlashCopy, Global Mirror Practice, Metro Mirror Practice, the Global Mirror either direction with Practice, Metro Global Mirror with Practice, and the multi-target MMGM with Practice session. So all of those will have a tab with the FlashCopy relationship in the View Modified Properties that will now display that option that you can check. Now, for the customers that have already set the server properties to specify that it should fail on the flash, I want to note that property will override the View Modify Properties setting. The reason why it overrides it is because I didn't want customers upgrading to this release and then forgetting to check that in the server properties or not even knowing about it, and have that the View Modified Properties override the server properties, and then all of a sudden it didn't fail the flash. So if you've set it before in the server properties, that will override it. But I encourage you, if you did that, to go check it in the View Modified Properties and then remove it from the server properties to avoid any confusion or support issues later on down the line. In 6.2.11, we added another new session type, which we call the ESE Sizer session. ESE stands for Extent Space Efficient. So what does this ESE Sizer session do? Well, it's designed to help you analyze your space requirements so that you could properly size for FlashCopy and Safeguarded Copy solutions. How does it work? Well, it gets a little bit difficult to explain, but basically in the DS8000 microcode 854 and above and 91 and above, they implemented a write monitoring bitmap, which this session takes advantage of. that write monitoring bitmap basically allows the hardware to track the amount of change data over a defined time without impacting any performance, so that you can take that data and analyze it to see how much data is going to change across your time, so you can size for your environment. So what the session does is you create the session, you add in the volumes that you want to monitor, to check on, to see how much they're going to change over time, and then you'll start it. It collects this data, and you can set some properties to it, so reset time and monitoring interval time. But basically, it'll collect that time over that data, which you can then export to a CSV file. And coming up shortly, I don't have a link yet or anything, but there will be a blog out there and some data. But there will be a tool out there where you can take that CSV file, import it into a spreadsheet type format, so that you can have it analyze that data and give you some sizings. This, you'll start to use this. You may not know out of the box how to use it, but if you have any questions, you can get lab services or perhaps even Washington System Center involved to help you look at it. But I hope to have more detail with that tool, which someone's writing for us in the near future. So this last feature I'm going to talk about, I'm quite excited about. It's really performance enhancements for both safeguarded copy and FlashCopy in mainframe environments. So just a little brief background, both FlashCopy and safeguarded copy, well, in order to create consistent flashes and backups, they do require a freeze to be issued to the hardware, so that across all the volumes in the session, they get a consistent flash or backup. And so those, as you may know, that freeze will cause that slight application impact, particularly if you're running this off of production volumes. So while CSM has implemented a number of enhancements over the years to try to minimize that application impact as much as possible, we still, because of system resources or other reasons, it's difficult for us to reach the kind of times you may get for doing the flashes or backups in GDPS or, say, CSM FlashCopy Manager. And so what this enhancement does is gets us to those levels. So how do we do it? Well, we've worked diligently with our counterparts in the iOS ZOS team to supply a new solution. So the iOS team is the same team that provides the hyperswap support for CSMs for all your high availability needs. Well, now, if you specify a ZOS association on a safeguarded copy or FlashCopy session, so that means you go into the CSM properties, view modify properties for the session. If you'll see that ZOS sysplex or system association. If you specify the system or sysplex there, CSM will then know for that session you want to enable this new feature. So what the new feature essentially does is, instead of issuing the flash through our traditional means, which was either a HMC call or a ZOS call, we will build the commands for both for the backup process, whether it be a flash and freeze and thaw the flash, or the backup, all the steps to do the safeguarded copy backup. We'll build those commands. We'll send them to the iOS component, and they will execute them. So because they are executing them in their page fix storage, they are issuing them through the FICON interface much faster than we can through the CSM side, and that causes it to minimize application impact to the levels of say GDPS or CSM FlashCopy Manager. So it's very simple to implement. Enable, set on, but there are some caveats. All the volumes in these sessions have to be attached to the ZOS sysplex that you associated to that session. So if you have any volumes that aren't attached to that sysplex, the flash or backup will fail. You'll get an error saying that it wasn't found. So that the iOS component has to know about those volumes in order for this to work. Another thing, you will need the iOS APAR OABLE 59561. This is not yet available, but hopefully first quarter 2021 it will be GA'd and available out there for you to use. So it's there very shortly, but the 6.2.11 version of CSM does support it. You'll see that. So again, so if you don't have all the volumes attached or they span multiple sysplexes, you won't be able to take advantage of this. So don't set a sysplex association. But I'm hoping there's a large number of you that can take advantage of this, set that sysplex association, and get the improved performance you need. So this will help, particularly in cases where you may be taking a safeguarded copy backup off of a production volume or a flash copy off of production volume. In fact, some of you CSM FlashCopy Manager users may want to look at this solution to see if it meets your FlashCopy needs based off the performance. Now, it doesn't totally implement all the features that FlashCopy Manager does in terms of the discovery portion, but on the performance side, it should improve the performance quite a bit. So very excited about this. Please get the word out. Tell your friends and tell everybody. But this is a good huge enhancement to the performance of these two solutions. All right, with that, that's all the new features for 6.2.11. This is the reference slide I usually put up, so you can get to the support matrix, downloads, RFE, etc. We always love feedback for CSM, so please open those RFEs. Please tell us what you want in CSM. I hope you see that we do implement those. We do work hard each release, working on those customer requests that you put out there. So I hope you enjoy the 6.2.11 release. Very excited about it, and we'll thank you very much for your time.